1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Let me tell you how.
Would you have enough money now to retire for the rest of your life?
Well, we paid most of it to the government, actually. We paid 93% of everything that was ever earned. So we don't have a great deal of money. But then, if I was to retire, I think I'd retire into just a little shack someplace. You know, by the time I do get out of it, I've had my fill of all the excitement, and you know, I think I'd just be really quiet, like a hermit.
If you were to ask me what song I would play for someone who never heard the Beatles, never heard Hello Goodbye, Strawberry Fields, Hey Jude, a song that could sum up the incredible growth of the band, I would play them Taxman. It's a ferociously 60s song, but its story is infuriating. So obviously George Harrison, the quiet and peaceful one, is fuming at Harold Wilson's supertax on the wealthy, even urged by John Lennon to add his name to the harmonies of the song, including Edward Heath of the Conservative Party at the time. They literally roasted politicians by names in songs. Now that's 60s. It's hilarious to me though that through all that anger, George was able to write such a Beatles masterpiece surrounding this awful superhero, supervillain tax dude bopping around and burglarizing the wealthy, on top of a really catchy song. Dude, George was so pissed about how much of his wages were being taken by the government that he sat down and wrote an anthem against the Taxman that literally sits in most top 10 Beatles songs of all time. And this is what he had to say about it. In those days, we paid 19 shillings and 6 pence for every pound we made. And between the super tax and the surtax and the tax, it was ridiculous. A huge penalty to pay for making money. That was a big turnoff for Britain. So anybody who made any money went to America or somewhere else. Even Ringo and the other guys had such an issue that they even tried to hide their taxes. We came up with one mad scheme where we paid a guy to go live in the Bahamas, hold on to our money so it would be tax-free. But in the end, we had to bring it all back, pay the taxes, and pay the guy. So we might as well have just left it where it was. But what makes the origin of Taxman so annoying to me is how difficult it was for George to get some help on it. So he writes the bulk of the song in a frenzy of anger and inspiration. But John and Paul didn't really consider him a songwriter at the time. So when he brings it to John asking for some help, being that he probably looked up to John as a songwriter, this is what John Lennon remembers feeling about that situation. He came to me because he couldn't go to Paul, because Paul wouldn't have helped him out at that period. I didn't want to do it. I thought, oh no, don't tell me I have to go work on George's stuff. It was enough on my own and with Paul. But because I love him and I didn't want to hurt him, when he called that afternoon saying, will you help me with a song? I just bit my tongue and said, okay. It had been John and Paul for so long. He'd been left out because he wasn't a songwriter up until that point. That's crazy, huh? It's obvious that George Harrison was an incredibly talented songwriter from our vantage point in the future. But it's sad that John and Paul didn't recognize him at the time as their equal. The world is full of artists who gave up, who didn't believe they were good enough, who never had people to cheer them on. But to know that even a person like George Harrison wasn't appreciated in his time, even though he deserved to be, makes me wonder how many talents, how many legends never got a chance to know that they were good enough. That's like the artist's tax. See you next week.
The last weeks of George's life, he was in Switzerland, and I went to see him, and he was very ill, and he could only lay down. And while he was being ill and I'd come to see him, I was going to Boston because my daughter had a brain tumor. And I said, well, you know, I've got to go. I've got to go to Boston. And he goes, that's the last words I heard him say, actually. And he said, do you want me to come with you? Oh, God. So, you know, that's the incredible side of George. God, it's like Barbara fucking Walters here, isn't it? You know?